going to talk about Eugene, which is a physical interactive genetic algorithm controller. My passion is modular synthesizers. This is one that I'm building at the moment. There's 5 of these units, and it's about the same size as the screen at the moment. And it just keeps growing. My wife's quite tolerant of me. This is our dining room table because there's no room in the studio.
What happens when you spill the gravy?
Yeah, it's fun because this is polished oak, so yeah. we do have problems. But there again, my wife's got a circular saw on the table, so big give and take there.
It's the same wood as the table, isn't it? You didn't saw a bit off the end.
There are some marks further up, but actually now I think I can put over the top when I saw it. So. But it is every room in our house is a workshop. That's how it goes.
That's what you like.
And so this is this thing here, which we'll be talking about later. So the idea of Eugene was years and years ago, it was in 2002, I was at an AISB conference in Edinburgh, and I saw Colin Johnson do a talk on a interactive genetic algorithm that he developed for controlling granular synth. At the time, I was sort of thinking it would be really nice to play with it, but he was unable to get his demo working because they didn't do apples in the presentation room. And it sort of stuck in my mind that at some point it would be really nice to have something very much there that you could play with. It's Oracle, so So I decided that one day I would go and have a little play with this and see what I could do. And finally, this year, I thought, okay, this is it. I've got the sort of bits, and I know roughly what I'm doing. And so I put this together. So most of you may completely know about genetic algorithm and interactive genetic algorithm. I'm going to sort of briefly go through it. The idea is genetic algorithms loosely parallel Darwinian evolutionary theory. There seem to be a couple of groups of people. Some people are very purist about it and say we want it to be very, very close to Darwinian theory, in which case, and to the sort of processes of genetics. And so they have things like inversion of strings of DNA, and they will incorporate that into their algorithms. Other people are far more pragmatic and say, well, actually, we like this sort of idea as a whole, we just want to implement it, and if we have to mess with things on the labels, so what? It doesn't matter because we're trying to get a good solution here. GAs are used in search and optimization problems, a massive range of things. Recently used things like interface design, used in generating musical patterns, used in algorithmic art, things like fashion design, lots and lots of things, aerial characteristics for engineering. And the basic idea is that you've got a situation that can be represented as a set of variables. These possible solutions or sets of variables are the individuals, and they consist of genes which are the binary strings. The actual variables themselves are genetic material. So the starting point is that you have some sort of random population of individuals. So you've just got a whole load of strings of bits or variables there. And then you have the fitness function which determines whether or not the individual is going to survive. Is it suitable for the purpose or not? That's quite an interesting one because I'm going to revisit exactly what this fitness function is and the implications for it later on. But the idea is that once you've got your initial population, you can pull out those individuals that seem to be fit for purpose, and then you can use a genetic process of combining their sections of their variables, the DNA as it were, and then you can create a new population from that. So your new variation, your new population inherits variables from the previous parents. Quite often, if you do that, you can start off and, as you hopefully will hear later on, what happens is when you do a demo, everything works perfectly, which is not intended. It's normally, the idea is to see some of the problems that occur. Quite often, you end up with a whole load of starting points that aren't necessarily great starting points. You might find the variables are actually quite close together. Randomness does not guarantee any sort of spread over the solution space. And so we have a mutation factor that we can randomly introduce small amounts of variation into the variables. And by doing that, we can then explore that solution space even more. And the idea is, hopefully, if all goes on, you get a sort of convergence on a solution that scores either above an agreed threshold in the fixed function, in other words, fit for purpose, or that you've actually gone through enough generations to say, this is as good as we're going to get. And this is quite a reasonable sort of way of doing things. It works well for certain types of problems and not for others. But I'm interested in something a little bit more, I suppose, a little bit different from this, which is the interactive genetic algorithm. So in the interactive genetic algorithm, the user is the fitness function. So you're often dealing with aesthetic decisions. And so you're saying, okay, I'm faced with, in an interface design, 8 or 9 different interface designs, and I'm going to pick or rate the ones that I think are best for purpose. And the user then does that rating, and depending on the score that they give each of the solutions, then the recombination of those variables takes place. Using various different things, you use things like roulette wheel method, or we can actually sort of do batch processing of it and use a couple of individuals to actually represent, I suppose, clusters in the solution space. So essentially what we do is we kill off the solutions that we don't like by rating them very, very low. Of course, they may still be selected. So this is the demo. I'm only going to demo one part of it because the other part is still flaky. It sort of works, but it needs tidying up, and I need to work out some effective ways of encoding some of the parameters, which is interesting. So yeah, let's just get this up and running. So what I've done is this generates at the moment as one option MIDI data, and that's what I've set it up to do at the moment. So MIDI is a protocol originally designed to allow synthesizers to communicate, because prior to that, my sort of massive systems I built, every system ran differently. They would use different voltage representations of frequency, have different triggering systems, and it was an interesting nightmare getting these things to talk. So MIDI was one of the sort of big changes when microcontrollers were introduced into synthesizers. And the other thing was the idea of having memory where you can actually save the settings. So with my synthesizer, I've got something like 400 controls. I have to remember the settings for it or to reproduce the sound sort of.
It never sounds the same.
You can never sound the same.
The temperature in the room is different.
And that's the best of that. So this is the synthesizer. This is a software where the version I'm using, the free one, I have to pay for one at home. It does exactly the same thing. And essentially, you can build your synthesizer here. This is very, very simple. I decided that in order to do the test, there's no point having anything really complicated. So what I have is this idea of a MIDI to control voltage converter. Everything is represented internally as voltages, even though they're not sort of virtual voltages. It's got 2 oscillators, which are the sources of the waveforms. It's got a low frequency oscillator for modulation. The modulation can either work on a filter or on the oscillator, so you can get vibrato or you can get wire effects. Essentially, there's the two possibilities there. I have a MIDI monitor in there because whenever I'm debugging or testing anything, that is the only way in which I can see whether things are happening the way I expect them to. I have some envelope generators which look after the shaping of the note over time, both from a volume point of view, loudness point of view, and a tone point of view. So one of them works on the amplifier, which is here, and the other one works on the filter, which is over here. The filter in this is more complex than many sense. It's state variable, so I have high-low band and notch filters. But overall, this is very simple. It is a very simple synthesizer. There are, I think, 27. I'm not going to count them now. 27 parameters.
Which environment is this? Which environment?
It's called synthetic.
Synthetic.
And it allows you to compile it to a VST instrument using things like Cubase. And the other thing that's nice about it, which most of my students don't appreciate, well, I think too over the years, is you can actually go and build your own modules from C++ as well and give you a good starting point.
This is the author is Vadim Zavalishyn. Is it the Vadim Zavalishyn, the author of this music?
This is, I think, Jeff McClintock.
Ah, okay,
I think so. Yeah, I think this is Jeff McClintock. And it's certainly not open source, but he does give you a development environment in which you can build your own modules. So he encourages people to be involved in the development while still retaining some rights. So, how this works, putting this up. Let's play on here. When I start this off, if I press one of these controls here, so rotary encoder, that initializes everything and assigns some random sounds. I can then play them back. Is it something else doing? This is always good. Oh yeah, good. Doesn't sound power supply repair. That's the first of my random sounds. Second one. Third one. Could you yeah, these would be great for car alarms. So let's just imagine I want a violin, and that's my starting point. So there's a bit of turn the volume down a little bit on here. That one. See what happens. I don't think that's very violin-like, so what I can do is if I pull the slider right down, that actually kills off that sound, and we'll replace it in the next generation with a completely new sound. I think that's completely irrelevant, so I can kill that one off. I think that's actually quite relevant for violin.
There's a vibration, vibrato.
We're thinking, aren't you? Maybe that's a bit relevant because I can hear some sort of note there. There's something weird going on there. Don't think that's irrelevant. I'll rate it low. So I'm going to rate quite highly two of them. I actually think that might be a little bit more like a violin. And you're thinking, no, it's not. It's a car alarm. And so I can hit the next generation button. Anything where I push the slider right up to the top will keep it from next generation. Anything where I pull the slider right down to the bottom will actually remove it. It has some interesting coding problems because what happens is that none of the resistors are that accurate, so you actually have to set things in bands to get good results. It took a little while to realise what was happening. So I can do my next generation button, and I've got two new sounds in here now. Maybe a little bit. Not sure about that one. And so on. And it does slowly evolve, but there are some interesting issues.
So it's interactive because you're doing this.
It's interactive.
You're choosing the fitness.
I'm choosing the fitness each time. So all I do is I listen to it and I rate it. I can decide to either I can move the slider to rate at each sound. To have a sound that a button that plays the sound. I can then rate it by pulling it right down to the bottom and kill it. I can have anywhere sort of in between this sort of range, which is a rating, and if I push up right up to the top, it's to keep the next generation. It's actually how the buildings will lose.
Well, I guess the fitness function is quite subjective as you're further away. I mean, some of these random starting points. I mean, I couldn't hear anything violin-like at all.
So this is the interesting.
So you're self-training at the same time as you're training.
There's an element of that in all sorts of horrible ways. So, but yes, in more ways than one, you're self-training, and that's part of my thing. So the idea was, I've got here a population of 6. It's a very small population, but one of the problems with interactive genetic algorithms is presented with 30 sounds or 40 sounds, or if you're using a genetic algorithm, you could have had as many as 200, 500 individuals in the population. Sitting and going through 500 sounds is tiring and not very productive. So typically these have quite low population. 6 is a little bit low, but this was a starting point. And I play buttons so I can trigger whatever events I want to happen in the code. It has a mutation control, so I can adjust the amount of mutation a little bit. I can improve that thing. I have an initialize button and an evolve button, and that's it. It's quite simple. If I get something I really like and want to keep, I can save it on the synthesizer with save the sound. That's one of the great things about digital synthesis. You can save stuff. That's one of the only good things. You can save stuff. So it does allow this thing of elitism. And it does allow you to re-randomize sounds, which are, can be argued are not necessarily things you find in a machine.
Do you have any recombination? Do you have any recombination? So when you take generation, do we have recombination for this, like crossover?
Yes, I have a crossover. And that's done randomly.
Okay.
Yeah, so I select the parent, so each parent I select, I then work out the percentage for each of the parents, and I spin a roulette wheel, so I just create a random number, pick each parent, make sure it's not the same one. So I've got 2 parents, and then I have a random crossover point where I get the crossover, and then I mutate.
The chance of crossover is proportional to the rating.
It's always crossover from the parents.
Yeah, but you've downrated certain things, so it's proportional to that threshold you've set, the likely crossover.
Being chosen, yeah, it's proportional. And for every free, so the only this is another problem with this setup is that if, for example, I choose to say I really don't like those 2 sounds and I really do like these 2 sounds, I'm only rating these 2, then although these are my parents, I'm only creating 2 new things. So I actually can reduce the amount of change to the gene pool very easily, but it seems like I'm doing the right thing, but actually I'm probably not. And that's one of the user issues.
It's a linear scale as well, is it?
Yeah, these are on a linear scale. So what I've discovered is I've tried this out with a variety of people. Most of them have some knowledge of music, so mostly music tech students from a school. And what happens is that they have no understanding whatsoever of how it works, all of the synth. They didn't see the synthesizer part. That was hidden from them. They were just listening. And what I was noticing is that they would sort of go, oh, I quite like that, I quite like that, and I don't like this. And also, they were then sometimes making very sensible changes because they understood a little bit about synthesis, and you could see that they were sort of picking up this knowledge of what was going on, or they were thinking a little bit carefully about what a sound might consist of. So when I picked the siren sound and said, that's close to what I like, if I remove the low frequency modulation, which is just one parameter, it's no longer a siren, it's going to be a flat sound, and it might actually be a lot closer to violin. So one parameter can have a massive impact on our sort of cognitive match, I suppose, with the solution domain. And so that's caused a problem. Another problem I have is that you notice that a lot of the sounds have noise in. And that's because I'm using MIDI here, and when I'm setting up the random things, the likelihood of the noise being selected, because it forms a feature of both oscillators and the modulation source, is fairly high. And as such, quite often we get sounds with noise in. Users quite often may or may not want noise, but it's not something which is, I say if someone was going to choose a sound to use in a composition, they wouldn't be normally thinking of, I want a noise-based sound. If they're using sound effects, they might think that. And so your starting point often, just because of the way that the data is encoded, has a massive impact on what users get. And then their understanding is sort of saying, actually, the fact that the length of the sound is correct is important, so I'll rate it. Is something that people don't tend to think of, because they tend to think of tone first. Okay, so there's this sort of immediate thing of, what is this immediate tone or tone over a second or two that determines their decision, and not thinking in any logical sense about the sound parameters. Then the other thing is in terms of how you're implementing, in terms of the results you get and how happy people are with what they're doing, there's this idea of, are we using this in terms of you're searching for a violin sound, or are you trying to explore what is possible with this synthesis model, and what can I get out of it that's interesting? So you sort of go, yeah, I like that. Yeah, that sounds good, I'm going to have that. And that's something that's particularly interesting, is what is the actual purpose? And often when you look at a lot of existing research, the purpose is a little bit blurred. Occasionally you see something which says, this is specifically there to search for something, but we're actually dealing with users who might change halfway through what they want. So you might say, yeah, I want to find this sound, but you might go, hey, but that car sound is cool. And, this sounds like Star Wars, much more fun. So the idea of keeping users on task disappears a little bit, which is quite interesting. And the other thing is I've used two enhancements to the original album. There's a whole load of them which are quite interesting to look at. So these are different things. So elitism is where you can keep a member of a generation for the next one. Randomize is where you kill off something completely re-randomize it. Seeding, which I tried with, again, interesting results. It's not very good if you have a very high mutation rate. The mutation rate is quite good for sound, but I haven't got results back for using this with an image editor, because the idea is this, that it works with anything. So with seeding, you start your initial population with things that are quite spread out in the solution space, and so you've got more chance of identifying the sort of things you want, or the sort of direction right from the beginning. And then there's morphing. Now morphing is particularly interesting because it's actually a little bit like codominance. So with morphing, instead of saying, okay, we're going to have a crossover point, where we say we're going to take a selection of variables from one and a selection of variables from the other, and that's our new individual. With morphing, you say, okay, we'll take all the variables from one or all the variables from the other, and we just take an average. So you take an in-between thing, which is a little bit like codominance in genetics. You have red snapdragons, you have white snapdragons, and when you get them together, you get pink snapdragons. In fact, it sort of looks like this, I think. I couldn't get any snapdragons. So what happens is, you can get red wine, you get white wine, and then when you do the crossover, you get, what's that?
You got some glasses as well.
Ah.
Only a very small amount of data is actually reduced this way.
Actually, experience it's not very good to mix. Not very good to mix different colors.
Is it white?
Starts off with pass it around.
It's your birthday.
It's my birthday, yeah. So this is my birthday. So that's morphing. For something, I haven't actually implemented this yet, but it seems to me like this might actually certain things this might work well, and for other things it won't. But I need to actually do it for real.
So does it sometimes produce very similar effects to crossover?
I think it's going to be quite different. So, for example, one of the things that I do at the moment is I have the noise level is something where it's part of an oscillator. So it's like you get sine wave, square wave, triangle wave, or noise level. The probability of getting noise is the same as getting a triangle wave or a round wave. What it may be worth doing is to say, okay, well in the real world, what is the probability of someone wanting to have noise and reduce that? That's one way around. Or just to have noise on and off. But then the problem is if you're using MIDI, then you're still going to use 8 bits for that on and off. And so you're giving it the same sort of amount of importance as another function which might be more important.
That might be more important for search, where you distinguish between searching and exploring.
Yeah.
If you're actually searching for a sound and two of them are kind of like that, that seems to make sense. But if you've got two that you happen to like, they might be for completely different reasons, and merging them wouldn't make sense. This might be a big bangy sound, that might be something, so yeah, maybe it depends what you're trying to achieve.
So it might be something which you could choose and change in real time would be the best option, I think. The other thing which I know is a lot easier to do is, I mean, I can again quickly implement it. So I do, hold on, I made some bad choices, I want to go back a generation. That might be quite an interesting one. So then you have things like real-time manipulation and mutation. I sort of have that, but I only have 3 values at the moment, and I haven't worked out what the best values are for my image processing. And then you can cluster your genes. So if you're working, for example, on the envelope of the sound, the way it changes over time, and typically on a simple synth like my one, you've got attack, decay, sustain, and release as the parameters that describe those changes. So I've put those together next to each other. That's a sort of a strategy, I suppose, in terms of saying we're going to keep some parameters together. So the user will say, oh, the envelope's to the right. Hopefully they select that. The likelihood is it will stay together. Not necessarily. This is quite a bizarre one. The idea of sweeping is that you take 3 of your variables and you sort of use a triangulation point and a single control. So you sort of say, okay, we generated some new sounds, but we're going to give you a single control where you can sort of sweep through some nearby space, just in case there's anything there that you like. And I think that was the funny thing that was Dalstead. Very, very effective in terms of finding the sort of sounds you might want. It seems to be quite a good way, but it's completely removed from the idea of a genetic algorithm.
Why? Why is that completely removed?
Because the sort of the idea in many ways is that you take away the idea of controlling the sound specific variables away from the user, and so actually you have to worry about it. And you say, now you've got some control back. It's limited.
But a standard approach with genetic algorithms is you go to a place in the search space and then you do some local hill climbing.
Yep.
And you get the result from there, and then you try again, and that's exactly that case.
But this lets you move, but quite a limited range. It's not. This doesn't give you a big spread. Then you've got this idea of clustering for fitness evaluation. So this is when you have a much larger population than the 6 I've got, but you might only have 6 individuals that were considered sort of average representatives for each of the clusters of population that are similar. And then with images, there's which is what I'm working on at the moment. They have a paging approach where instead of having lots of separate images on different pages, you put multiple images on the same page and make it easy to evaluate, and you can switch between them quickly. And then some people, which is not really practical with this, have you multiple users, so things like GenJam, mobiles allow lots of people to interact with jazz solos at the same time. Not always via sort of wireless devices. Sometimes it's actually holding cards up in the audience and somebody quickly doing some coding, changing the parameters. So at the moment, things that I'm looking at specifically, and I think you were talking a little bit about this earlier, this idea of co-evolution. The users actually change with the landscape. So what happens is you set off and you have some sort of sound in mind that's just there in your head. But by the time you've listened to a few things, that sound is actually changing. You're no longer thinking of the same sound that you originally started with, partly because of your understanding of that space. So how you then interact with the actual population is that the landscape itself is changing. So there's a sort of more of a co-evolution approach. The other thing is token size. At the moment, we've been using pretty much everything as 8-bit variables for controlling the synthesizer. I'm looking at changing that and using a more formal sort of standard serial implementation where I can have something that's just single bit changes. I think that's probably a much better approach. And then this is really, really important. And the idea is that if you go back to sort of massive modular synthesizers, or you look at all the possibilities that are offered by software. I was trying out the image processing software. I think it was a PaintShop Pro when it came out. Was a really good example of this. When you convert it to JPEG in PaintShop Pro, you could convert it down so that you ended up with almost 4 pixels because you reduced the quality so much, you removed so much of the colour. However, if you use Photoshop, you try and convert it into the lowest possible quality, it actually still looks very good. You have the same problem with synthesizers. So if you take a giant modular old-fashioned synthesizer, you can guarantee that most combination of leads plugged in and control stone will produce very little. Or will produce some very nasty, unpleasant sound. But if you take a lot of very modern synthesizers and try to get a nasty or unpleasant sound, it's almost impossible because the manufacturers have sort of said no one would want a siren that sounds like a bus crashing and being modulated and swung around on a lead. You know, it's that sort of thing isn't something that's necessarily considered musical. So depending on your sort of, I suppose, your search space, how you define your search space, whether you say, actually, we do want to look at every single possibility, or you want to restrict it and say, actually, we just want nice musical sounds, then the effectiveness changes dramatically, the algorithm. If you limit things, when I use this with a K1 synthesizer, which is much more musical, I'm finding it very much faster to get to where you want, providing you've chosen something which is a musical type sound in the first place. So you say I want a cello or a violin, and that works quite well. So that has a massive impact. And then the idea of what do users want, and do they want that once they start playing? That's something which seems to be quite interesting. So whenever I've said to people, how to play, they either start saying, oh, I wonder if I can get this, or they get diverted and they say, oh, I want to try and make some more with noises. So that's also a major issue.